Hi you guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you love makeup and you love true crime, definitely think about hitting that subscribe button, guys. It would mean so much to me. And if you have any cool case suggestions, definitely leave them down below. So today's case was requested by Krista Billings, so thank you, Krista. And it's kind of a case about a young love triangle, where in 1992, an ordinary Indiana teenager was just living an ordinary teenager life until 4 girls tortured her for hours before eventually killing her. This is the case of Shanda Sharer, so let's just get into it. So Shanda was born on June 6, 1979 in Pineville, Kentucky, to Stephen Sharer and his wife Jacqueline, who later was known as Jacqueline Vaught. And that's because her parents ended up getting divorced later on, and then her mother and Shanda moved to Louisville. She went to St. Paul High School, where she completed her 5th and 6th grades. And she was really into sports. She was on the cheerleading, volleyball, and the softball teams. When her mother divorced again, she moved with her mother again in 1991 to New Albany, and Shanda enrolled in the Hazelwood Middle School. She then transferred to Our Lady of Perpetual Help, which was a Catholic school, and over there she joined the girls' basketball team again. And her mother actually moved to New Albany because she wanted Shanda to be closer to her father. I think Shanda was really pretty. I feel like she reminds me of that actress that played a young Jennifer Garner in that movie 13 Going on 30. Like, don't you think she kind of looks like that? So at this time, Shanda was 12. She was a really easygoing girl. She got along with everyone and she loved going to school dances. But it was one dance that she went to which essentially set off like a chain reaction, which would eventually lead to her death. So just a few days after starting at this new school, Shanda ends up getting into a fight with a girl named Amanda Heavrin. And Amanda was 14 and Shanda was only 12 at the time. The fight got them both into detention, and then during detention, the both of them just ended up like chatting and getting to know one another. And during this, they actually decided that they actually liked each other and they got along, and then they became friends. Shanda's mother was initially very hesitant about this friendship because Amanda was a couple years older than Shanda. And then at the fact that when they got into the fight, Amanda was the one that actually punched Shanda first. But Shanda just kept telling her mom, like, no, Amanda's actually a really good person. Like, you don't need to worry about it. So then Amanda and Shanda ended up really starting to hang out with each other and spending time together. And then they began passing notes to each other in school. And if you guys don't know, before there were text messages, you would write notes to each other in class on just pieces of paper, and you would just write silly things or communicate that way. I mean, please tell me some of you guys passed notes in school so I don't feel old. I remember sometimes the teachers would actually take the notes and read them out loud in class. Like if they caught you, they would grab it. And one day I think I remember like writing something so nasty to one of my friends, like as a joke, like I was just being really bad. And the teacher like grabs the note and she just like looked at it. And normally like they would read it out loud. And I remember her just like looking at it and going, you guys are so sick. And I was like, oh. But the contents of Shanda's and Amanda's notes were not necessarily what you would expect from two girls. It wasn't about boys or, what music they liked, things like that. But in one note, Amanda asked Shanda if she liked girls. She also complimented Shanda's clothes and told her she loved her taste in music, and she also complimented the clothes she was wearing and told Shanda she was super pretty. From this, Amanda and Shanda ended up having this romantic relationship, and they even went to the school dance together. That dance took place in October of 1991, and during this dance, the girls were having a great time, and then sometime throughout the night, Amanda introduces Shanda to another girl named Melinda Lovelace. Now, she wasn't technically introduced to her, but at the dance, Melinda confronted Shanda because Melinda had previously been dating Amanda for a year. And now, seeing Shanda and Amanda together, she was extremely jealous of the two of them. Melinda was enraged that Amanda was now spending time with someone new, and especially the fact that this girl was like a lot younger. So at the dance that night, when she confronted them, she not only confronted them, but she also threatened Shanda that night. Then she started writing letters to Shanda expressing her hatred for her and how much she despised the fact that Amanda was spending time with Shanda. So Melinda Lovelace was born in New Albany, Indiana on October 28th, 1975. And she was the youngest of 3 girls. Her parents actually did not provide a very stable upbringing for Melinda. Larry, her father, he was a Vietnam veteran, but by all other accounts, he was a sexual predator. He frequently forced his wife to have sex with him and multiple other men while he watched, and he was accused of inappropriately touching another young girl in the family. He raped his wife, and unfortunately, he sexually abused all 3 of his daughters. In fact, he apparently fondled Melinda since she was an infant, and he stayed and slept in her bed till she turned 14, which is just so sick. And it must have been so hard for Melinda's mother. I mean, we can all just be like, you need to leave, but it's really hard in that situation. Like, what do you do, especially if he's abusive and he threatens you? Then at that point, when Melinda turned 14, he left his family and he moved to Florida. And when he did this, Melinda was actually devastated that he moved, and she felt like he had abandoned her. And I feel like that's the sick psychology behind abuse. I mean, you would think that she'd be happy that he was leaving and the abuse was finally sort of coming to an end. But in fact, the abuse continues that way because of all the years he abused her, she was probably confused by his absence and felt like he had actually abandoned her. So now all of Melinda's sisters, so 2 of them, and her, they all came out as lesbians when they were early teenagers. And Melinda was actually really gorgeous. Like, she had this like beautiful brown hair, and she also reminds me of a celebrity, but I don't know who. But because of Melinda's history of abuse, she became super controlling and possessive of Amanda. She would actually become enraged anytime Amanda spoke to anyone, especially if it was Shanda. In November of 1991, Shanda's mother found some notes that Amanda and Shanda were sharing with each other that clearly indicated that the 2 of them were in a romantic relationship. And I think it also stated or made it clear that they were also having a physical relationship. At the time, Shanda's grades also started dropping and she began failing in school. Jackie, Shanda's mother, demanded that Shanda stop spending time with Amanda and focus on school. But despite, whatever her mother told her, Shanda just kept staying in this relationship with Amanda. And then at this time, Melinda also began threatening Shanda in public. And then she even threatened to kill her, a 12-year-old. So because of this, Jackie was like, no. So she transferred Shanda to another school, a private school. And she did this in an effort to keep Shanda and Amanda away from each other. She just wanted the 2 of them to just chill out for a little bit. And Jackie would later on go on to say, it's not the fact that she was a lesbian. She goes, what do I care? I don't care if she's a lesbian. The issue for her was the fact that she had this older girl pressuring her to do things. And she felt like Shanda was too young. She was 12. She was like still a baby. Now, within a month of transferring, Shanda was doing much better at her school. Her grades started improving. She started behaving a little bit better. She started passing all her classes, and then she even began trying out for cheerleading again. However, Amanda didn't like the fact that Shanda broke things off, and she just kept pursuing Shanda, and she would also call her a lot. So Shanda actually ended up complaining to one of her friends, like, man, Amanda just keeps on keeping on, on me. Maybe Shanda knew at this point that like none of this was good for her. Meanwhile, Melinda continued to write notes too. She wrote several notes to Amanda explaining how much she hated Shanda and how she wished that Shanda was dead. I mean, this is wild because they aren't even in a relationship anymore and you're still freaking out. That, for me, goes beyond the scope of normal jealousy. Unless she knew that Amanda was still pursuing Shanda, like maybe that's what was like upsetting her. But that should have made Melinda realize like, Amanda's not interested in you anymore. You know what I mean? But like she just kept on harassing the two of them, essentially harassing them. Amanda claims that she showed these notes to her father, the ones that Melinda sent Amanda, and her father actually turned these notes into a youth prosecutor, but nothing was ever done about it. Unfortunately, that did nothing to stop the horrific events that were about to unfold. On a cold winter's night of January 10th, 1992, Melinda enlisted 3 friends, Lori Tackett, 17, Hope Rippey, 15, and Tony Lawrence, 15, to help her carry out her plan. And that plan was to take revenge on Shanda Sharer. On that same night, Lori Tackett, she was getting ready to go out with some of her friends. First, she picked up her friend Hope and then Hope's best friend, Tony. And as Hope gets into Lori's car, Lori asks Hope, well, did you tell her yet? Referencing Tony. And Hope was like, no. And then Tony goes, well, what are you talking about? And Lori smiled at the two of them and she looks at Tony and says, we're going to kill a little girl tonight. So let's do a quick background on these 3 girls. Lori Tackett was born on October 5th, 1974, and her parents, especially her mother, were somewhat religious extremists. Lori said there were several times, her mother's church was trying to pray over her and perform exorcisms. Through this, Lori became extremely rebellious and started experimenting with the occult as a teenager. She actually ran away from home, but then returned when her father offered to buy her a car. Lori had also been hospitalized in the spring of 1991 for mental issues. At the time, she claimed to be hearing voices and began self-mutilating. She dropped out of school in September of 1991, and that's when she said she became obsessed with hurting people. In fact, she actually told someone that she felt her destiny was to murder someone and spend the rest of her life in prison. I mean, she's literally 17 and thinking about these things and speaking this way, it's wild. Hope Rippey was born on June 9th, 1976, and her family life was actually better than that of Melinda and Lori, despite her parents being divorced, but they later on reunited anyway, so they didn't actually stay divorced. Her family say that she was very impressionable, and her father especially feels that Lori was a bad influence on Hope. Hope seemed to be a follower who just kind of suffered from low self-esteem and would just do anything to make others happy. She was really susceptible to peer pressure, and peer pressure is probably the reason why Hope also started to self-mutilate, like her friend Lori. Tony Lawrence was born on February 14th, 1976, and her family life was stable, but when she was a bit younger, she had actually been raped. And after the rape, police issued a non-contact order against the boy that did it to her, but no charges were ever pressed. So I think she just felt kind of unsafe from that. And then after this rape, she also began self-mutilating and then started to become sexually promiscuous. Following the rape, she also had a history of suicide attempts. So the reason I went through their background is basically to show that these 3 girls all have something in common, issues in common. They, related to each other much more than people say who grew up in a white picket fence world. They clearly had some issues that needed treatment, all of them, And I'm talking about Melinda too. I mean, what she went through was essentially a lifetime for her because it happened for such a long period of time, and she definitely needed treatment. So back to the car. So as Lori, Hope, and Tony are in the car, Lori keeps driving and goes to pick up one more friend, one that Hope and Tony had not met as yet. And that friend was Melinda. Now, once the 4 girls were in Lori's car, Hope was told to drive. So Hope was only 15 and she just had her learner's permit. So she drives the car to Jeffersonville, which she was instructed to by Lori and Melinda. And this area was actually where Shanda would be spending the weekend with her father. So it wasn't actually her mother's home that they drove to. They actually knew where Shanda was going to be that weekend, which is pretty creepy. They even knew which house Shanda lived in. So they pulled up to Shanda's house. And when they did, Melinda tells Hope and Tony to go to the door and ask for Shanda. She told them to tell Shanda that Amanda wanted to see her. And I find that so weird. Like, if girls that I'd never even known, if they were friends of a friend, come to my house and ask me to come outside, I'm not going. Like, maybe back then it was so different. Like, it's the 90s, right? But I think it's crazy that from what I understand, Hope and Tony had never even met Shanda. So it's crazy. So Hope and Tony, they go up to Shanda's front door and then they ask for Shanda. So Shanda comes to the front door and she goes, "Hey, it's me, Shanda." And they proceed to tell Shanda, "Hey, Amanda, sent us here. She wants to see you. And yeah, do you want to come with us?" And from this information alone, Shanda seems quite excited. She's excited that Amanda wants to see her. And I mean, I understand why. Again, she's only 12. So she tells the girls, like, "Okay, can't come with you now. Can you come back around midnight and then I will go with you?" She explained that she had to wait for her father and her stepmother to go to sleep before she could leave the house. So the girls go to this punk rock concert in Louisville. And then on the way back, they stop at Shanda's dad's house once more. This time, Tony's like, "I'm not going up to the door again." So Hope and Laurie, without any hesitation, they go up to the front door and wait for Shanda. Hope even snuck inside the house to go and help Shanda pick an outfit out. And during this time, Laurie, she returned back to the car and she tells Melinda, "Look, Hope is bringing Shanda any minute now. You need to hide." So Laurie tells Melinda to go and hide in the back of the car and then they cover her with a blanket. At this time, Melinda, she already had this large butcher's knife in her hand ready to attack Shanda. Hope and Shanda then get into Laurie's car and they head to this place called the Witch's Castle, which was just this burned out stone building. It's isolated and abandoned, and it usually served as a teenager's hangout. Literally just minutes after they left Shanda's father's house, Melinda, she jumps up from the back seat. She pulls Shanda's hair back and puts the knife to her throat. She taunted Shanda, telling her, "You should have listened to me when I told you to stay away from my girl Amanda," all this kind of stuff. And she wanted Shanda to actually confess to stealing Amanda away from her. Shanda was trying to respond, but she couldn't because she had her head back in such a way and the knife to her throat. How can you even respond to what you're asking me to do? It's wild. So then when they get to Witch's Castle, they pull Shanda from the car and they made her strip off all of her clothing. Now, at this point, the other girls assumed that Melinda was just going to threaten Shanda. They didn't think that she was actually going to really do anything. So they thought they were there to threaten Shanda into breaking up with Amanda, finally, once and for all. They were wrong. And initially, Hope and Tony stayed in the car while Melinda and Laurie were out with Shanda at this location. Melinda punched Shanda and slammed her head into her knee. This alone caused massive bleeding because Shanda had braces at the time. So when the knee, hit the face, it was a really bad injury from the get-go. For 7 hours, these girls brutally tortured Shanda. Hope now joined in, and her, Laurie, and Melinda would yell out to Shanda and taunt her and be like, "You don't look so hot now, do you?" And they said other things like, "I bet you're going to leave Amanda now." Just really immature things. And I guess that's because they were immature. They beat her, tied her up. And then at this point, Melinda actually tried to slit Shanda's throat. The knife was too dull, so Melinda and Laurie then strangled her with a rope and then stabbed her in the chest. So at this point, they think she's dead. So they take Shanda and they put her, she's unconscious, and they put her into the trunk of Laurie's car. And I just think that's a load of crap. If you thought Melinda was going to scare Shanda, then why didn't you guys say anything when Melinda pulls out this knife and actually stabs her, actually strangles her? It just doesn't make sense to me, that type of an excuse. So they then went to Laurie's house to clean up and then to drink some sodas. Then they drove around again for a while, but then they start hearing Shanda screaming from the trunk, and they were like, "What the heck?" She was still alive. So Laurie pulls the car over, they open the trunk, and then they beat Shanda in the trunk with a tire iron. So then they go back to Laurie's house, and then while they're inside, they hear dogs barking from outside near Laurie's car. And they realized that the dogs were barking because Shanda was making noises in the trunk, and that's why it was riling the dogs up. So Laurie and Melinda left again with Shanda. This time they went alone because Hope and Tony stayed at Laurie's house and they took a nap. And then over the next several hours, Melinda and Laurie, they drove around with Shanda in the trunk, and they would just stop the car intermittently, go to the trunk, beat Shanda a little bit, keep driving, drive around, beat Shanda a little bit. Like that's what they enjoyed doing. At this point, she was beat, stabbed with a paring knife, and then even sodomized with a tire iron. A tire iron. When Laurie and Melinda returned to Laurie's house in the morning, they believed Shanda was finally dead. So when they get back to Laurie's house, they then start laughing and telling Hope and Tony, what they had been doing to Shanda for all those hours. So as the sun rose on January 11th, 1992, all four girls, they pile back into Laurie's car and they go and drive to get some gasoline. So they buy this 2-liter bottle of Pepsi and then they empty it out and then fill it up with gasoline instead. They then drove out to a rural area on Lemon Road. At this point, Shanda had been beaten so badly, she was really, really hurt. But guys, she was still alive. I don't know how, but she was still alive. All she could whimper now were the words, "Mommy." Oh, so sad. When the car stopped, Tony, she refused to get out of the car. And the other 3 girls, they pull Shanda out of the car and then they wrap her up in a blanket that they had brought from Laurie's house. Hope goes and grabs the gasoline and then pours it all over Shanda. Laurie then lit the match and lights Shanda on fire. Melinda then took her turn pouring more and more gasoline onto Shanda to ensure that she would die. The girls then just left Shanda there in that rural road, just thinking that the fire is going to incinerate her body. Just to be sure, that their work was really done, Melinda makes the girls drive back around one more time to just look at Shanda's burning body to ensure that she kept on burning. Then, and I think this is the sickest thing, I don't know how people really do this, but they go to McDonald's, they have breakfast there, and then during this breakfast, they're commenting to each other about how the bacon at McDonald's looks like Shanda's burned body. Then later that morning, literally later that morning, 2 hunters in the area stumble across Shanda's body, burnt body. Meanwhile, it's now morning time and Steve, Shanda's father, realizes that Shanda is now missing. So Jackie then arrives at Steve's home because Shanda was spending the weekend with her father. So he tells Jackie comes to the house and then they look around for Shanda a little bit, but then realize yep, she's probably gone somewhere or run away. So then they report her as missing. And then literally later that evening, that same day, Tony and her parents walk into the police station because they wanted to report a horrific story. Horrific. Can you imagine even telling the police this? Your child is telling the police this with you right there and you're like, my child was involved in that. I can't even imagine how disappointed not even disappointed, I don't even know what the right word is, how disgusted Tony's parents would have been with Tony. So Tony then explains the events of January 10th and 11th to the police, and they confirm the person that was found dead on Lemon Road was Shanda. At this point, Melinda Loveless, she had already told Amanda what had happened to Shanda and how proud she was about what she did. And she even brought Amanda to show her the bloody trunk of Laurie's, because I'm guessing Amanda was probably like, you didn't do that. You didn't really do that. Melinda also told another one of her friends, but none of them, Amanda nor this other friend of Melinda's, reported Melinda to the authorities. Before the day was even over, Laurie and Melinda were charged with first-degree murder. Tony and Hope were charged shortly after, and then dental records later confirmed that the body found on Lemon Road was actually Shanda. Now, the insane thing is, again, everything that Shanda went through, she was 12, the way that these girls beat her, and I don't know if it's because these girls were also young, so perhaps they didn't know what they were doing, and like maybe they weren't even hitting her hard enough, which I don't expect to be the case because they're 14, 15, 17 years old. Like I'm pretty sure they know how to hit someone. But Shanda, when her autopsy was conducted, she actually didn't die from any of the injuries that the girl sustained on her with objects. How she actually died was smoke inhalation, meaning she was burned alive. So at the time of the trial, Hope and Tony were only 15. So because of their age, they were not eligible for the death penalty. But Melinda and Laurie were. The prosecutor then announces that, yep, I'm going to go ahead and try and seek the death penalty for Laurie and Melinda. Tony, who obviously came forward the day Shanda died, and she was the one that revealed the location, she was actually given a plea deal in exchange for being a star witness for the prosecution. She pled guilty to 1 count of criminal confinement and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. On September 21st, 1992, with the death penalty looming above them, Melinda and Laurie both accepted plea deals. Each of them were sentenced to 60 years in prison. Hope also accepted a plea deal, got 60 years in prison, but then hers was reduced to 35 when she appealed. Tony was released in 2000 after serving 9 years in prison. Hope served 14 and got out in 2006. Laurie was released in 2018 on the 26th anniversary of Shanda's murder. Melinda was also surprisingly released in 2019 after serving 27 years in prison. Now, when Laurie was interviewed, she mentioned that she did not know Shanda at all, and she still committed this horrific, brutal crime. She didn't go into that evening even knowing what was going to happen. She didn't want anything to happen. She states that it was just a case of peer pressure, essentially gone wrong. She said it spiraled out of control way too fast into something that should have never happened. Furthermore, in an interview with Dr. Phil, actually, she stated, in her opinion, why she believes people kill. She says they kill to feel superior, or they feel high of the victim's fear, and they're probably just thirsty for like the spill of blood, which I'm just like, how can you be thirsty for the spill of blood? But we've read so many cases where people say that that's what they crave. They want to see blood being shed by a victim. And then what would drive Melinda, 16 at the time, like she was the mastermind behind this whole murder. Jackie, Shanda's mother, actually said, if you want to see a person, like the closest you can get to seeing a person that has nothing inside them, look into Melinda's eyes, because she has nothing there. But I mean, if we really look into Melinda's past, she did have a difficult childhood. And due to the sexual abuse allegations that actually came out in the trial for Shanda, Larry, her father, was arrested and charged with rape, sodomy, and sexual battery. He awaited trial for 2 years before most of the charges were actually dismissed because they passed the statute of limitation. But then Larry, in 1998, he committed suicide by jumping into traffic and dying. Now, before her release, Melinda, in prison, she joined this ICANN program in which she spent many years training dogs for handicapped people. When Shanda's mother, Jackie, found out, she actually committed to donating a dog every year to this program in Shanda's honor. And she knew that Melinda was assigned to train these dogs. And for Shanda's mother, Jackie, this was something good to finally come out of all the bad that had happened in her life. And she felt that she was helping someone, so helping Melinda, but then Melinda was helping others. So it was like a pay it forward kind of thing. Jackie said of Melinda when she saw her in the program, she said, I was really taken aback. I saw someone almost reborn. She was sincere. She was compassionate. I think the ICANN program allows her to have something in her life that she can show love back to, and that's never betrayed her on either side. It's my choice to make. Shanda is my child. If you don't let good things come from bad things, nothing gets better. And I know what my child would want. My child would want this. Melinda, for her, in her eyes, she feels that Jackie has really actually helped her. Melinda stated, she helped me to heal, forgive, and grow, whether she wanted that or not. She did a good thing. I would thank her. I couldn't thank her enough. Angel is in good hands, and I'm doing it for Shanda, and I'm doing it for her. So I think Angel is a dog. But yeah, it seems that Melinda actually did reform herself, and she did understand what she did was wrong, and she did try to better herself. Unfortunately, Shanda's father, Steve, he suffered from alcoholism after Shanda passed away, and he died of his alcohol addiction in 2005 at just the age of 53. Shanda's mother and stepmother actually believed that Stephen died of a broken heart after losing Shanda. Jackie was actually given the opportunity to confront Hope on the Dr. Phil show in 2011. And Jackie said the only thing Hope could have done for Shanda's family is for Hope to just serve her sentence. But none of the girls convicted actually served their entire sentences at all. Amanda also appeared on the Dr. Phil show defending herself against allegations Jackie was making, saying that Amanda had molested Shanda. Jackie states on the show that she also believes that Amanda is responsible for Shanda's death because she didn't do anything about all those threats. 4 teenage girls, 3 of them who didn't even know Shanda, kidnapped, beat, strangled, stabbed, sodomized, burned, and tortured this little 12-year-old girl. Tony and Hope were actually away in the house from Lori and Melinda for hours when Lori and Melinda were driving around with Shanda in the car. Like, they were away for hours and they still didn't do anything to report them or help Shanda in any way. Hope then was the one that poured the gasoline on Shanda so that Lori can light the match. And only after the brutal murder did Tony actually come forward. And in a way, I understand that, because maybe the whole time she was like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is happening. And then like when it happened, she was like, holy crap. Lori was deeply obsessed with the occult and, killing someone. Melinda was so enraged with jealousy and anger that she actually targeted this young little girl. And somehow they are all walking free today, living their lives. And yeah, it's kind of crazy, that they got released on parole, but at the same time, it's like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like, do you want them to reform and live a better life? But then at the same time, if you're Shanda's family or someone who has been through something like this, you don't want their killers living a life while your loved ones was taken away. Shanda's mother has actually shown like true strength throughout it all. She has made several TV appearances, and I watched some of them, and she really is quite inspiring. She explains that she understands that Melinda came from this abusive, unloving home, that she had a horrific childhood with sexual assault and violence, and that that's what molded her into the person she was or became that night. She advocates against child abuse, and she seeks to see the positive in life, which she actually believes that Shanda would have wanted. And she obviously believes that Shanda was taken too soon by a group of essentially mean, violent girls. After I researched this case, or should I say during researching this case, I was like, this case seems so familiar to me. And then I'm like, I keep hearing about these things. Like, I think I've already done 1 or 2 cases about girls killing girls. And it's kind of like, is it that or is it something else? Shanda died in the most brutal way. I mean, I think when I research these cases that I'm like, oh yeah, well, this is horrible. This is a horrible way. And then I read another case and I'm like, oh my God, this is a horrible way. Then you need to read another case. You're like, that's a horrible way. And I always think like, damn, how do young people come up with this shit? Like, for real, come up with wanting to hurt someone like that. And yeah, I guess I can't really speak because I didn't come from that type of childhood, and we don't know how that molds or shapes someone. Is it truly because they have been hurt so bad that that makes them seek out to hurt another person the same way? Shanda was 12. I mean, there was a very low possibility that this relationship between her and Amanda was even going to work or last. Melinda was 16. She wasn't fully grown, but she was 4 years older. And when you're like at that age, I don't know if you guys remember, but the difference in your mind between 12 to 16 is huge. So I feel like Melinda definitely would have known better at that point. I feel like it's always the same thing. These girls or people have traumas and then they don't get the help that they need. But the question is, who is supposed to help them? Their parents? Not if they are part of the problem. The school? The council? I really don't know, and it seems like a helpless situation. I mean, I went to high school with some girls who went through troubled childhoods, and I actually had a friend that at the time I didn't notice it, but my parents were actually the ones to tell me, like, I believe that this girl's father is abusing her. And at the same time, it's like, how do my parents go ahead and like report this man to the police? Like, how do we do that without proof? And my dad is a lawyer. or was a lawyer at the time, is a lawyer, but at the time he was the lawyer. So it's like, if he didn't even know, what do we do? What do we, how do we report this person? And that was just a suspicion, you know what I mean? But then when they told me that, the more I was looking at my friend and the more she would like tell me like stories and stuff, I was kind of like, that's weird. But my friend didn't realize that she was being abused, if that makes any sense. So there was no way to kind of get her help if she didn't, like, she loved her father and she believed that it was normal. So, I mean, later on it was found out and she did get help. But what I mean is that in that situation, when you're in that tight situation, who is supposed to help that person? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Should I even be sharing that? One thing I can say is that Shanda's mother definitely made me look at this whole thing in a different way. At first I was like, it's a joke, their sentences are a joke and their time served is a joke for such brutality. But in a way, Shanda's mother is right. You need to show compassion. And as hard as it is, these people need to be rehabilitated. Jay actually also once told me, we were watching this show about a prison, like prison life, and the guard was being super nice to the inmates. And I was like, why is this guard being so nice to them? Like, these guys are criminals. And Jay essentially told me, if you treat criminals like criminals, they will always believe that they are criminals. But if you treat them as people and show them that the entire world isn't what they have only experienced in life, the pain that they have endured in their life is not everlasting, perhaps there is hope for them to grow and change and evolve into better people that can live happily among us. And I was just like, you're right. It's true. Let me know your thoughts on today's case, guys. I would love to know what you think down in the comments down below. If you watched this far, please subscribe. It would mean so much to me, guys. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.